The rain had just started to fall when the sound of heavy engines rolled into the cracked parking lot like distant thunder, and that was the moment a small, trembling voice cut through the noise of the city. A boy no older than 9 stood at the edge of the road, holding a rusted bicycle with bent spokes and peeling blue paint, his hands shaking not from the cold, but from desperation. His clothes hung loose on his thin frame, his shoes were worn through at the toes, and his eyes carried a weight no child should ever know. As the bikers slowed and turned their heads, the boy lifted the bike slightly, as if offering his heart instead of metal, and said the words that would change everything. "Buy my bike, sir. Mommy hasn't eaten in 2 days. If you believe stories like this still matter, if you believe kindness can change lives and second chances are real, take a moment right now to like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us what humanity can still be." The bikers were not strangers to hardship. Their jackets were worn, their faces marked by years of wind, sun, and regret, and their machines carried scars from long roads and longer lives. To most people they looked intimidating, like trouble wrapped in leather and steel, but beneath the noise and the rough edges were men who had seen life take everything from them more than once. They had gathered that evening simply to rest, to escape their own ghosts for a while, but the sight of that boy froze them in place. He stood there with no shame, no anger, only a quiet urgency that felt heavier than any threat. The rain soaked his hair, ran down his cheeks like tears he refused to shed, and pooled around the cracked tires of the bike he was trying to sell. The leader of the group, a broad-shouldered man with gray in his beard and tired eyes, felt something tighten in his chest. He had buried a daughter years ago, lost her to an illness that money and pride couldn't fix, and in that boy's face he saw the same silent bravery. The bike itself was barely worth anything. The chain was rusted, the brakes squealed, and the seat was patched with tape, but the boy held it like it was treasure, like it was the last piece of hope he had left. The bikers exchanged glances, unspoken understanding passing between them. This wasn't about a bike, this was about survival. They learned quickly that the boy's name was Elias, and that he lived a few streets away in a building most people avoided. His father had died the previous year in a factory accident, and what little savings they had vanished into hospital bills and funeral costs. His mother, once strong and cheerful, had fallen sick not long after, her body weakened by stress and hunger. She tried to shield her son from the worst of it, skipping meals, pretending she wasn't hungry, but children always know. Elias knew when her hands shook too much to cook, when she lay still for hours just to conserve energy, when the fridge stayed empty no matter how often it was opened. The bike had been his last possession of value, a gift from his father years before, and selling it felt like saying goodbye all over again. As the rain grew heavier, the bikers did what came naturally to them. They acted. They pooled their cash without counting, pressing folded bills into the boy's small hands, giving him far more than the bike was worth. One of them lifted the bicycle, testing its weight, nodding as if it were a fair trade, though everyone knew it wasn't. Elias tried to protest, confusion and relief mixing on his face, but hunger is louder than pride. He thanked them with a voice that cracked, turned, and ran back toward his neighborhood, clutching the money like a lifeline. Most people would think that was where the story ended. A simple act of kindness exchanged in the rain, but something about the boy's fear lingered. The leader watched Elias disappear between the buildings and felt an unease settle in his gut. He knew that hunger was rarely the only problem in places like that. Where poverty lived, predators often followed. He remembered his own youth, the way powerful people took advantage of the weak, the way systems were designed to squeeze until nothing was left. Without a word, he motioned to the others, and they mounted their bikes again, engines roaring softly as they followed at a distance. The neighborhood Elias led them into was a place forgotten by the city, where broken streetlights flickered like dying stars, and the walls were stained with years of neglect. The apartment building stood crooked and tired, its windows dark even before night fully fell. Elias slipped inside, and the bikers waited, listening to the rain and the distant sirens that never seemed to stop. Minutes passed, then more. Just as they were about to leave, a man emerged from the building, tall and sharp-eyed, wearing a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. He counted money in his hand, glancing around nervously before tucking it into his pocket. The bikers recognized that look. It was the look of someone who took without earning, who survived by draining others dry. They learned soon enough that this man was the landlord, a figure feared by everyone in the building. He had raised the rent without notice, demanded payment even when tenants were sick or out of work, and threatened eviction like a weapon. Elias's mother had begged for time, explaining her condition, but mercy wasn't profitable. The money Elias had just earned would not go toward food or medicine. It would disappear into the same pocket that had taken everything else. That realization ignited something fierce. The bikers were men who lived by their own code, one shaped by loss, loyalty, and justice when the world offered none. They didn't rush in blindly. They waited, watched, and listened. Over the next hour, they learned more than they wanted to know. They saw other tenants, hand over money with downcast eyes. They heard muffled crying behind thin walls. This wasn't just about one family. This was about a system of quiet cruelty that thrived because no one dared to challenge it. When they finally moved, it was with purpose. The leader stepped forward first, his presence calm but unyielding. The others flanked him, engines silent but ready, their shadows stretching long across the wet pavement. The landlord's confidence faltered when he realized he was no longer the biggest threat in the room. He tried to assert authority, to hide behind rules and paperwork, but intimidation doesn't work on men who have stared down worse than fear. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't need to. The truth alone was heavy enough. By the time the rain eased, the money had been returned, not just Elias's, but more. Arrangements were made, promises backed by action. The bikers had connections, people who knew how to navigate legal gray areas and shine light into dark corners. Complaints were filed. Inspections were requested. The landlord's reign of quiet terror began to crumble under scrutiny he could no longer avoid. Inside the apartment, Elias's mother lay weak but awake, her eyes widening in disbelief as help arrived where she expected none. Food filled the empty kitchen. Medicine was placed gently on the table. For the first time in months, she ate without guilt, tears falling into her hands as she realized her son no longer had to carry the weight alone. Elias watched from the doorway, his small shoulders finally relaxing, the bike forgotten for a moment, as something far more important returned. Hope. The bikers didn't stay long. They never did. They left quietly, like the storm that had passed, but their impact remained. Word spread through the building, then the neighborhood. People who had felt invisible began to believe they mattered. Children slept easier. Parents breathed deeper. The landlord moved on, his power broken, his influence gone. It wasn't a perfect ending. Life didn't suddenly become easy. Bills still came. Illness still lingered. But the fear was gone, replaced by a fragile but growing sense of dignity. Weeks later, Elias rode his bike again. The same rusted frame, now oiled and repaired by one of the bikers who had returned briefly, unable to forget the boy's face. Elias pedaled through the street with a smile that felt like sunlight after endless rain. He waved at strangers. He laughed loudly. His mother watched from the window, stronger now, her body healing along with her spirit. She didn't know the names of the men who had helped them, only the sound of engines and the feeling of being seen. Stories like this don't make headlines. They don't trend. They live quietly in the spaces between suffering and survival, carried by people who choose to care, when it would be easier not to. The bikers rode on to other roads, other towns, carrying with them the knowledge that sometimes the smallest voice can stop the loudest injustice, and that kindness, when backed by courage, can take back what was stolen. If this story touched your heart even a little, if it reminded you that compassion still exists in unexpected places, please take a moment now to like the video, share it, and let others feel this too. Before this story ends, leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from, or simply write "Kindness Matters" so this message can reach even more hearts. Because somewhere out there, another child is holding on to hope with shaking hands, waiting for someone to notice, and maybe, just maybe, This story will remind us all to look twice and act once when it matters most.